The fire broke out just after midnight, with orange flames licking the side of my cedar cottage while I lay fast asleep inside. If my dog, Rusty, hadn't started barking like his fur was on fire, I might not have made it out alive. I barely managed to escape, coughing violently and clutching Rusty in my arms, as the flames had already torn through the roof. The fire chief later told me it was arson. Accelerants had been found on the porch and in the flower beds. As soon as I heard this, I knew who was behind it, Karen Triet. I didn't even need him to say her name. Karen Triet, president of the Sycamore Lakes Homeowners Association, was 62, permanently angry, with scowl lines etched into her face as if she'd been scowling for decades. She'd been gunning for me ever since I bought the land on the edge of the community and built my off-grid cottage. Technically, I wasn't part of the HOA, but Karen liked to pretend otherwise. I was new to the area, having moved out of the city after retiring from a civil infrastructure planning job. I bought 10 acres just outside the HOA's jurisdiction, built everything myself, solar panels, rainwater collection, a composting system, and lived completely off the grid. No city water, no HOA fees, and definitely no Karen. Karen hated it. "You're dragging down property values," she'd snapped at me the first time she came pounding on my door 8 months ago. "This shack is a blight," she yelled. I politely told her to leave, and then less politely after she persisted, I told her to get off my land. She returned with threats, fines, complaints of trespassing, and even accused my compost bin of being a biohazard. I laughed. She didn't. What she didn't realize, though, was that her entire neighborhood, every house inside Sycamore Lakes, relied on a water main that ran through my property. It was an old easement agreement from decades ago when the land was still ranchland. The water company had negotiated a private easement with the previous owner. When I bought the land, that easement had expired. Legally, I owned the main. Nobody in the HOA had bothered to read the fine print, but I had. I let the water run because I wasn't a monster. But after the fire, things changed. I stood there, staring at the charred remnants of my cottage, the smell of smoke in every breath. Rusty sat beside me, tail still, ears flat. The fire trucks had parked down the road, and the HOA members were gawking from their golf carts. Karen stood in front, pearl earrings dangling, her pink tracksuit hugging her as if she were posing for a mugshot. "You can't prove it was me," she said, her voice dripping with defiance. "I didn't say it was," I replied, my voice calm, perhaps too calm. "Are you going to rebuild?" Her sneer deepened. "Of course not," she said. "You won't even be able to." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I've got other plans." The next morning, I didn't call the cops, though they were already involved. I called my lawyer, then I called the county water board. By nightfall, Sycamore Lakes had no water, nothing. No pressure, no toilets, no showers, no sprinklers. Nothing. Karen showed up at my gate before dawn the next day, banging on it like a madwoman. "Brendan, open this gate right now." I stood behind my reinforced fence, arms folded. "Did I?" I asked, pretending to think. "I guess the main runs through my land, and without a valid easement, I'm under no obligation to let it run, am I?" "You can't do that," she shrieked. I held up a folder. "County says I can." They were more than helpful when I showed them the arson report and the expired utility contracts. Her face turned a deep shade of red. "You're blackmailing the whole neighborhood." "No," I said calmly. "I'm just exercising my property rights. You of all people should understand that." Karen stormed off, the tires of her golf cart squealing as she left. I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. She would come back with lawyers, the rest of the HOA board, and whatever shady tactics she could muster. What she didn't know was that I'd already been 10 steps ahead. I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff's office. The fire marshal's report was damning: traces of gasoline, a matchbook from a local diner, and a surveillance video from a nearby deer cam that caught a woman in a bright pink tracksuit sneaking off my property just after midnight. Karen's tracksuit. I didn't go public with it right away. I let her dig her own grave. Over the next week, Sycamore Lakes descended into chaos. No water meant no functioning homes, pools turned green, lawns withered. Karen tried to get a temporary tanker truck, but the county wouldn't issue a permit without health inspections. I had already flagged the HOA for several violations. Neighbors turned on her fast. "You said you couldn't do this," shouted one man on her lawn. "This is your fault, Karen." Another woman yelled, "You got what you deserved." Karen tried to hold an emergency HOA meeting, but only 4 people showed up. The rest were too busy hauling buckets of water from their bathtubs or begging friends to use their showers. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. Slowly, this time. I wanted her to see every nail, every beam, every solar panel. She watched, arms crossed, jaw clenched, teeth grinding down to dust. Then, the day I'd been waiting for arrived. Detective Alston, a no-nonsense guy with a buzz cut and a gravelly voice, knocked on her door. I happened to be walking Rusty past her house when it happened, pure coincidence, of course. "Karen, try it," he said, holding up a warrant. "You're under arrest for arson, trespassing, and attempted property damage." Her face went slack. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," he replied, slapping the cuffs on her. She screamed all the way to the squad car, her little lap dog barking after her, as if it could reverse time. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the whole thing unfold. A few neighbors were nearby, whispering and filming on their phones. One turned to me. "You really did it, didn't you?" I shrugged. "Just defending my property." The guy chuckled. "You're a legend." I didn't say anything. I just kept walking, Rusty trotting beside me, tail wagging as if he knew justice had been served. But I knew Karen wasn't the only rotten root in the HOA. I had a feeling the fire had only been the beginning. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, things started to get really interesting. By then, the burned beams of my cottage had been cleared away, the foundation reset, and a new frame stood taller than before. I'd hired a local crew, a family-owned construction outfit called 3 Brothers. They were fast, didn't care much for the HOA, and even helped me install a lightning detection system, just in case anyone else got any ideas. I figured with Karen out of the picture, things would cool down. They didn't. The HOA board scrambled to recover. They appointed a new temporary president, Gregory Vaugh, a former insurance adjuster with a penchant for bow ties and a voice that could put you to sleep. Gregory didn't have Karen's venom, but he had something worse, bureaucratic obsession. He didn't scream or threaten. He filed paperwork and quoted obscure clauses, as if brushing his teeth. He showed up at my gate 4 days after taking office, clipboard in hand, wearing a smug expression that didn't match his trembling hands. "You're in violation of Article 6, Section 12, he said, tapping the paper. "I'm not in Sycamore Lakes," I replied, still standing on my porch. "The Rural Review Committee has concerns." "So do I," I replied. "About arson. Want to talk about that instead?" Gregory's eyes twitched, and he shuffled backward, looking like he'd stepped in something unpleasant. "Just consider scaling it back for harmony's sake," he said. I didn't reply. Rusty growled low from behind the screen door, and Gregory took that as his cue to flee. That same evening, the sabotage of my water system began. Someone dug a shallow trench near the valve housing at the edge of my land. They didn't reach the main line, it was buried deeper under reinforced concrete, but they left behind a rusted crowbar and a partially collapsed lawn chair with a cigarette still smoldering in the cup holder. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't need to. Instead, I installed a sensor-triggered floodlight and a second trail camera. This time, I went all out, using the same cameras that wildlife researchers use to track raccoons. The next night, someone tried again. This time, the camera caught everything: a man in his 50s, balding on top but hiding it with a backward golf visor, wearing khaki cargo shorts and a shirt that read HOA strong. He fumbled with a wrench and cursed as the dye powder shot upward like a puff of neon chalk. He ran straight into a low-hanging branch, knocking himself flat. I printed stills from the footage and mailed them anonymously to every house in the HOA. By morning, my mailbox was stuffed with apology notes, not from the board, of course, but from the residents. One woman even left a homemade pie on my porch with a note that read, "We're not all like them." The board, however, doubled down. Gregory called an emergency meeting and announced a vote to annex my property into the HOA's jurisdiction. I wasn't invited. The problem was, they had no legal standing to do it. My parcel was recorded under a separate plat with no shared easements or deed restrictions. But they tried anyway, citing some nonsense about community integrity. They even sent the proposal to the county recorder's office. That's how I ended up at a public hearing on a rainy Thursday morning, sitting across from Gregory and 3 other board members in cheap suits, while a weary county clerk tried to make sense of their printed fantasy. I waited until they finished reading their dramatic proposal, then stood up and handed the clerk a binder. Here's the original plat map, the utility line agreements, and correspondence from the County Water Board confirming I have exclusive control over the main. Also, here's a notarized statement from the previous owner confirming the HOA boundaries end at the old split rail fence. Gregory opened his mouth, but I cut in. And while we're at it, I continued, here's a copy of the fire marshal's report, the arrest affidavit for Miss Triet, and video evidence of a current board member attempting to tamper with utility infrastructure. That's a felony, by the way. The clerk blinked. The board members went pale. Gregory tried to recover. We're just trying to ensure standards. This man's actions have created a hostile environment. I raised one eyebrow. You mean turning off a water main I legally own after your president tried to burn me alive? The room went silent. After the hearing, the county issued a formal notice that declared the HOA's attempt to annex my property invalid. They also warned that any further interference with my land would be classified as harassment under state civil code. However, the board didn't back down, they simply became more subtle. 2 days later, a code enforcement officer named Janine came to my door. She looked exhausted, as if she'd rather be anywhere else. I got a call about illegal structures, she said, eyeing the solar array. Let me guess, I responded, no name on the call. Anonymous tip, she sighed, but we both know who it was. I handed her the permits, the installation specifications, and the signed inspection reports. As she flipped through the documents, she remarked, "This is cleaner than most commercial builds." You could teach a class on compliance, I joked. She blinked. That explains a lot. We chatted for a few more minutes before she left, promising to close the complaint. It was clear she harbored contempt for the HOA, but their desperation was growing. That weekend, I caught a teenager trying to spray paint "Parasite" across my driveway. When he saw me, he dropped the can and bolted. I didn't chase him. I simply picked up the can, bagged it, and added it to the growing evidence file I was maintaining in a fireproof cabinet. Then came the mailer, a glossy, full-color flyer sent to every resident in Sycamore Lakes. The front page featured a picture of my new cottage, cropped to make it look like a bunker, with the headline, "The Threat Next Door." It accused me of everything from environmental violations to noise pollution to being un-American. I didn't dignify it with a response. Instead, I filed a defamation suit, naming every board member who had signed off on the mailer. I attached security footage, county records, and an affidavit from my construction crew, all proving the lies. 3 days later, their lawyer, a twitchy man with a sweet tooth and a bad comb-over, called, begging me to settle. No deal, I said. You people wanted a fight, and so did I. Now here we are. The lawsuit made the local paper, with the headline, HOA faces lawsuit over retaliation campaign. The article quoted the sheriff, confirming that the fire investigation was still ongoing, and included a sidebar about the water supply disruption. The comments section exploded, with most people siding with me. One even suggested I run for county supervisor. That night, I stood on my porch, Rusty at my feet, watching as another moving truck pulled out of Sycamore Lakes. The neighborhood was unraveling. Lawn care services had stopped showing up. The pool had been drained. Half the residents were using bottled water or driving to relatives' houses to shower. The HOA's power was slipping, and I wasn't done yet. I had discovered something else hidden in the county archives, something Karen and Gregory had missed. A clause in the original HOA charter required a renewal vote every 25 years for it to remain in effect. The last vote had taken place 26 years ago, which meant the HOA's authority had technically expired. I had the receipts to prove it. The timing had to be perfect. On Monday morning, I went to the county clerk's office and requested a certified copy of the original Sycamore Lakes HOA charter. One phone call and a 20-minute drive later, I was sitting in a quiet records room with a manila folder in my lap, flipping through a document that hadn't seen daylight in over 2 decades. There it was, buried in dense paragraphs, typed on an old typewriter, a clause requiring a community-wide reaffirmation vote every 25 years. The last recorded vote had been 13 months before I was even born. This meant the HOA had been operating without authority for over a year. I took the document straight to the county legal department. The staff attorney, a woman named Daria with ink stains on her fingers and a stack of zoning disputes on her desk, looked over the document, adjusted her glasses, and let out a low whistle. "This is the kind of oversight that gets entire boards replaced or dissolved," I said. "It's like finding a buried landmine," Daria replied, "and then realizing you own the field." Daria agreed to issue a formal opinion for the county's records, but it would take a few days. The damage, however, was already done. As soon as the opinion went public, any enforcement action by the HOA would be rendered null and void, fines, restrictions, architectural reviews, all invalid. I kept quiet for now. Instead, I returned home and got to work. The new cottage was nearly finished, the interior still needed some finishing touches like cabinet doors and electrical panel connections, but the structure itself was solid. I decided to host something the HOA never expected from me, a community open house. I printed flyers and left them on the windshields of every car parked on Sycamore Ridge Drive. The message was simple: curious about my home? Come see for yourself. Saturday, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. No mention of the HOA. No provocations, just an invitation. Saturday came, and so did the neighbors. At first, it was mostly younger couples and families who'd moved in over the past 5 years. Then more showed up. By 3 o'clock, there were over 40 people in my yard, sipping iced tea, sampling lemon bars from a folding table, and wandering through the house with wide eyes and easy smiles. I didn't gloat. I listened. A man named Desmond, who lived near the tennis courts, leaned against the porch post beside me. "Funny thing," he said, watching his daughter run across the gravel path. "I thought you were some kind of recluse. That's what they always said about you. You know, the board said you were dangerous, said you were trying to undermine the community." I didn't respond. He looked around at the people admiring the solar battery setup in the garage. "Turns out, you're the only one who actually invited us over." A few feet away, 2 retirees were asking about the rainwater filtration system. A teenager was sketching the cottage frame in a notebook. Someone else had brought a casserole. I waited until just after 6 o'clock, when the last guests had trickled out, and the sun dipped low behind the pines, before heading inside to open my laptop. The county's legal opinion had just gone live. I downloaded the PDF and read every line. It was even better than I'd hoped. Not only had the HOA failed to hold the required renewal vote, but their use of fines and enforcement actions over the past 13 months could be considered fraudulent under state housing statutes. This meant that every dollar they'd collected, every lien they'd threatened, and every architectural denial they'd issued, all of it might have to be refunded or reversed. I didn't file anything immediately. I waited for Gregory's next move. He didn't disappoint. On Monday morning, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. It wasn't from the board, it was from a law firm representing them. It was a cease and desist letter, demanding that I refrain from hosting unpermitted public gatherings or conducting unapproved construction viewings. I drove straight to the county building, walked past the reception desk, and handed the letter to Daria. She read it, snorted once, and said, "They're doubling down on a handful of twos." "Can I respond?" I asked. "Absolutely," she replied. With her help, I drafted a reply that not only rejected their claims but also attached the county's legal opinion as an exhibit. I copied every resident on the HOA mailing list and sent both digital and physical copies. The fallout was immediate. 3 board members resigned within 72 hours, citing personal reasons. Angry emails circulated like wildfire. Someone started a group chat called Free Sycamore, which added over 200 residents. Gregory tried to contain the panic by calling for a special emergency session to reaffirm the HOA's standing. But without the original vote, it was like trying to glue the Titanic back together mid-sink. Then, the audit began. A resident named C, a quiet woman with a background in nonprofit accounting, offered to review the HOA's financials. She requested access to the past 5 years of expense reports, vendor contracts, and reserve fund activity. Gregory refused, so she filed a formal petition, citing the HOA's own bylaws. She gathered the necessary 37 signatures in under 48 hours. The audit unearthed something even I hadn't expected: tens of thousands of dollars in landscaping contracts awarded to a company owned by Gregory's cousin. Payments for consulting services with no deliverables. Duplicate invoices. Unapproved upgrades to the community clubhouse, complete with granite countertops and a wine fridge. C compiled the report and released it to the neighborhood. The next board meeting, held on the clubhouse lawn because the keycard system mysteriously stopped working, drew over 100 residents. I stood near the back, arms crossed, listening as voices rose and fingers pointed. Gregory tried to speak. "I understand emotions are high. You stole from us," someone shouted. A woman in sunglasses held up a copy of the audit. "You paid yourself through a shell company." A man near the front shouted, "You threatened my wife with fines over a garden gnome, and you were embezzling the whole time." Gregory tried to leave, but the crowd surged, blocking his path. Someone called the sheriff, not to arrest anyone but to witness a vote. The community passed a resolution to dissolve the HOA right there on the lawn. It wasn't legally binding yet, but it required formal filings. The momentum, however, was unstoppable. By the end of the week, Gregory had vanished. His house went dark, and a moving van appeared 2 days later. No one said goodbye. Without the board, the HOA's shell collapsed. Residents began forming a voluntary neighborhood committee, not to enforce rules, but to coordinate things like block parties and snow removal. People started painting their homes in colors that weren't on the approved list. One guy even added a chicken coop. No one complained. I kept the water valve shut, not out of spite, just as a reminder. The county had already forced the neighborhood utility to reroute the main through a new conduit, bypassing my land entirely. But the old valve still sat there, padlocked, a silent monument to what had happened. One afternoon, I found a folded note tucked under my gate latch. It was written in elegant cursive and unsigned. It read, "Sometimes it takes fire to burn away the rot. Thank you." I framed it and hung it next to the breaker panel. The cottage was quiet again, but not lonely. Neighbors waved when they passed. Some stopped to ask about solar panels or water filters. A few even brought baked goods. Rusty got more belly rubs than he knew what to do with. And me? I finally had the peace I'd come here for. But every now and then, I'd walk the edge of my property, past the old fence line, and find rusty nails or faded warning signs left over from the old regime. I never removed them. I just left them there, a reminder of what had happened. The final blow didn't come with sirens or shouts, it came in the form of a vote. Quiet, deliberate, and witnessed by a single county official seated at a folding table beneath an old oak tree. It had been 3 weeks since Gregory disappeared, and the old HOA board scattered like mice when the lights turned on. During that time, the neighborhood had started to feel different. Not in terms of population, as only a few homes had sold, but in spirit. Lawns were no longer identical. One house now had a hammock hanging between 2 maples, another had painted its shutters a deep cobalt blue. A single dad down the road strung up a tire swing, and no one told him to take it down. I hadn't planned on attending the vote. I figured I'd done enough already. But see, the accountant who had uncovered the financial abuses, showed up at my gate on the day of the meeting with a paper plate full of blueberry scones. "Come on," she said, "you earned a front row seat." I picked one off the plate and broke it in half. "You sure they want me there?" "Brendan," she said, "you're the reason they're even getting a choice." Rusty made the decision for me by trotting up beside her and licking her hand. That dog never liked anyone on the first try, so I took it as a sign. The vote took place on Sycamore Lakes Green, a stretch of grass that had once hosted mandatory events like HOA-mandated Easter egg hunts, where plastic eggs were counted and sorted by color. Now, it looked like a community again. Folding chairs had appeared, as had a cooler of lemonade. Children darted around holding sidewalk chalk and popsicles. The county observer, a bespectacled woman named Harriet, called the vote to order with a clipboard in hand and a stopwatch at her side. "Only residents of Sycamore Lakes may participate," she said, "and only 1 vote per household, per the dissolution clause under state statute." There were murmurs. A few questions. Harriet answered them in the calm tone of someone who had dealt with much larger messes than suburban revolts. Then she handed out the ballots. I stayed back, watching from beneath the sycamore tree, older than the neighborhood itself. A few people nodded in my direction. One man, Desmond, raised a thermos in salute. The vote took less than 15 minutes. The counting took even less. Harriet cleared her throat. Out of 124 eligible households, 117 voted. 1 abstained, and 6 voted to retain the HOA. She looked up. Effective immediately, the Sycamore Lakes Homeowners Association is dissolved. There was no cheering. No applause. Just a deep sense of relief. People hugged. Some cried. Harriet packed up her clipboard and walked toward me. "You made a lot of noise over here," she said. "We don't usually see neighborhoods follow through." "I didn't think they would," I replied. "They wouldn't have, without you." She scratched Rusty behind the ears before walking away. I stood there for a while, watching the last few families gather around a picnic blanket someone had laid out on the grass. The man who had once threatened fines over a mailbox now handed out watermelon slices. The woman who'd filed complaints about porch lights was laughing with someone whose toddler had just spilled juice on her sandals. It took a slow collapse of power for them to remember what community looked like. As the sun dipped behind the trees, a familiar car pulled up near the edge of the green. I recognized the dent in the bumper before I saw the driver. It was Karen. She stepped out like a ghost dragged back by unfinished business. Her hair was whiter than I remembered, and she wore gray slacks and a windbreaker zipped to her chin. She surveyed the crowd as if arriving late to her own funeral. No one greeted her. She walked toward me slowly, as if the ground might give way beneath her at any moment. "I thought you'd be gone by now," I said. "I'm on bail," she replied. "Trial's in 2 months." "You're bold, showing up here," I said. "I needed to see it," she muttered. See what's left. I watched her eyes scan the lawn, people laughing, children chasing fireflies. They're still here, I said. Turns out, they were never the problem, I added. She didn't respond, just stood next to me, arms crossed, like she used to when she tried to assert control through posture alone. But now there was no board, no gavel, no water authority, nothing left to enforce. She turned to me. You think you won? I think we all did. I built this neighborhood, she said. No, I corrected her, you ruled it. Big difference. She looked down at her shoes. I didn't think it would end like this. It didn't have to, I replied. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but then she saw Rusty sitting between us, ears up, tail twitching, watching her the way animals sense something deeper than words. She stepped back. I should go. You should, I agreed. She hesitated before walking away. No one stopped her. No one even waved. That was the last time I saw her. Life didn't change overnight, not in the dramatic ways people expect. There were still property taxes, power outages, and barking dogs late at night. But without the HOA, people began solving problems the way they used to, by talking, asking, and offering help instead of issuing threats. The chicken coop down the road expanded into a vegetable garden. The woman with the cobalt shutters added a porch swing. A teenager opened a bike repair stand in her garage. No one sought permission. No one needed to. One afternoon, I heard a knock on my door. It was C, this time with a stack of printed flyers. We're starting a neighborhood council, she said. Volunteer-based. No dues, just coordination, emergency preparedness, maybe a community tool shed. Thought you might want to be part of it. I took a flyer. I'm not much of a joiner. You don't have to be, she replied. We just need people who care. I looked at the flyer. It was simple, a date, a time, a location, my front yard. You booked me without asking, I said, raising an eyebrow. She laughed. Figured it's only fair. You started the fire, after all. I agreed to host the first meeting. It was a modest turnout, maybe 20 people, but it was enough to start something real. People brought ideas. They listened. Some offered to plant trees along the main trail. Others wanted to revive the old community garden. Someone suggested organizing first aid training. No one asked for permission. They just offered their time. As the meeting wrapped up, a boy no older than 8 wandered up to me, holding a small notebook. Are you the guy who stopped the rules? He asked. I knelt to his level. Well, I helped stop the people who made the bad ones. He nodded solemnly. My mom says you're why we have chickens now. Tell your mom she's welcome, I replied. He handed me the notebook. Inside, there was a drawing, stick figures and a house with solar panels. A dog with oversized ears. And a big red X through a sign that said HOA rules. Thanks, he said before running off. I kept the notebook. It sits on the shelf above my door, next to the folded thank you note and the county opinion letter. The land is quiet now, peaceful, but not silent. Children laugh. Neighbors mow their lawns at odd hours. Someone down the road plays acoustic guitar on their porch. There's no uniformity. No control. Just life. And that's all I ever wanted.